They mocked the broke dishwasher who studied after every shift. 10 years later, he bought the restaurant chain. Ethan Cole was 26 years old, had $43 in his bank account, and owned exactly 2 pairs of work pants. One pair was black. The other had once been black, but had faded to a tired gray after hundreds of washes in the basement laundry room of the building where he rented a narrow room above a closed-down pharmacy. Every afternoon at 4:30, Ethan put on whichever pair was cleanest, buttoned a white shirt with a permanent yellow stain near the collar, and walked 6 blocks to Bellamy's Steakhouse. Bellamy's was the kind of restaurant where wealthy men complained about the temperature of wine that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. Its entrance was framed by polished brass. The dining room glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths were replaced the moment a guest spilled a single drop of water. The menus had no prices printed beside several dishes because, as one manager liked to say, anyone who needed to ask probably should not be eating there. Ethan never entered through the front. He used the delivery door beside the dumpsters, walked down a narrow hallway that smelled of bleach and raw onions, and spent the next 9 hours standing in front of an industrial sink. He washed plates, he washed pans, he scrubbed burnt butter from sauté pans until his knuckles cracked. He pulled broken glass from drain traps. He carried heavy trash bags through rain and snow. He cleaned the kitchen floor after the chefs left. And every night, when the final plate had been stacked and the last cook had disappeared through the back door, Ethan sat alone at a stainless steel preparation table with a notebook, a second-hand business textbook, and a calculator held together with clear tape. He studied until the night manager turned off the lights. Most of the staff thought it was funny. "Professor's back in class," one of the line cooks would say as he passed. "Careful," another would add. "One day he might calculate how many plates he washes per hour." The jokes usually came from people who earned only slightly more than Ethan did. That was the part he found strange. The men laughing at him were not restaurant owners. They were not investors. They were not living the lives Ethan wanted. But they had been in the kitchen longer than he had, and that gave them confidence. They believed experience meant accepting where you were. Ethan believed experience was useful only if it helped you leave. He never argued with them. He lowered his eyes, waited for the laughter to end, and kept studying. He had learned a long time ago that announcing your plans gave other people the chance to destroy them before they were strong enough to survive. Ethan had not always been poor. At least he had not understood that he was poor when he was a child. He grew up in a small apartment with his mother, Denise, and his younger sister, Mia. His father had disappeared when Ethan was 9, leaving behind unpaid bills, an empty closet, and a telephone number that stopped working 2 weeks later. Denise cleaned offices at night and worked in a grocery store bakery during the day. She came home smelling of disinfectant and sugar, slept for 4 or 5 hours, and returned to work. There was rarely extra money, but there was always dinner. Sometimes it was only rice, canned beans, and fried onions. Sometimes it was soup stretched across 3 days. On special Sundays, Denise roasted a chicken and placed it in the center of the table as if she were presenting a feast in a palace. Ethan remembered those meals more clearly than any expensive dish he would later taste. His mother had a way of making scarcity feel temporary. "This is not where we're staying," she often said. She never said where they were going. She simply refused to believe their current life was permanent. When Ethan was 17, Denise collapsed at work. The doctors found a heart condition that had been made worse by years of exhaustion. She survived, but she could no longer work 2 jobs. Ethan left school before graduation. He told himself it would be for 1 year. He stocked shelves at night, delivered furniture during the day, and used every spare dollar to help with rent and Mia's school expenses. 1 year became 3. 3 became 5. By 24, Ethan had no diploma, no savings, and no path forward. Then Denise died. Her death did not happen dramatically. There was no final speech, no sudden revelation, no moment when the world paused to acknowledge that something important had disappeared. She went into the hospital on a Tuesday. She died early Thursday morning. Ethan sat beside her bed with Mia asleep against his shoulder and watched the sunrise through the blinds. After the funeral, he found a folded piece of paper inside his mother's Bible. It contained only 4 lines. Ethan, do not confuse responsibility with surrender. Help your sister, but do not bury your own life. You were meant to build something. Mom. He carried that note in his wallet until the paper softened along the folds. 6 weeks after the funeral, the furniture company reduced its staff. Ethan lost his job. 2 months later, he fell behind on rent. By winter, he was sleeping on the floor of a friend's apartment and applying for any position that would take him without a diploma. Bellamy's hired him because the previous dishwasher had walked out during a Saturday dinner service. The kitchen manager looked at Ethan's application for less than 10 seconds. You ever washed dishes professionally? No. You ever worked hard? Yes. Can you start tonight? Yes. That was the interview. For the first 3 months, Ethan thought only about surviving. The kitchen was hotter than any place he had ever worked. Water soaked through his shirt within the first hour. Steam clouded his vision. Chefs shouted for clean pans as though the entire restaurant would collapse if Ethan did not produce them within 30 seconds. He went home with burns on his forearms and pain in his lower back. But the restaurant fascinated him. Not the food, not at first, the system. He began noticing how everything moved. The hostesses controlled the pace of the dining room. The servers created relationships with guests. The cooks transformed ingredients into products worth 10 times their raw cost. The managers watched labor hours, reservations, complaints, and inventory. The owner appeared only twice a month, but his name was on the building, the menus, the wine labels, and every paycheck. Ethan began asking questions. How much did a steak cost the restaurant? How much did they charge the customer? How many tables had to be filled before the restaurant became profitable? Why were certain dishes removed from the menu? Why did the manager panic when food waste increased? At first, the staff ignored him. Then they became annoyed. What does it matter to you? Asked Victor, the senior line cook. You planning to buy the place? The kitchen erupted in laughter. Ethan forced a smile. Not tonight. That made them laugh harder. But someone heard the exchange. His name was Samuel Brooks. Samuel was 63 years old and worked 3 evenings a week as Bellamy's bookkeeper. He had once owned a small neighborhood restaurant with his wife. After she died, he sold it and spent several years consulting for local businesses before accepting part-time work at Bellamy's. He was quiet, sharply dressed, and invisible to most of the kitchen staff. One night, he found Ethan studying at the preparation table. The book open in front of him was Introduction to Financial Accounting. Samuel stopped. You understand any of that? Some of it. What don't you understand? Ethan hesitated. Most of it. Samuel looked at him for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair. Show me. That night, Samuel explained the difference between revenue and profit. The next week, he taught Ethan how to read an income statement. After that came food cost percentages, payroll ratios, rent, debt service, cash flow, and inventory turnover. Samuel never praised him. He simply asked harder questions. If a restaurant is full every night, can it still lose money? Yes. How? If the margins are wrong, if labor is too high, if food is wasted, if debt is too expensive. If sales increase, does profit always increase? No. Why? Because growth can create costs faster than revenue. Samuel nodded once. Good. Ethan learned more in 6 months at that metal table than he had learned in his previous 5 years of adulthood. He completed his high school equivalency exam. Then he enrolled in 2 evening classes at a community college. He paid tuition in installments and survived on staff meals, instant coffee, and whatever groceries Mia brought when she visited. Mia was 19 by then and studying nursing. She hated seeing her brother exhausted. You cannot keep doing this, she told him one Sunday. I'm fine. You sleep 4 hours a night, sometimes 5. That is not better. It's temporary. She looked around his rented room. The ceiling had a brown water stain shaped like a continent. His desk was made from a door placed across 2 plastic storage bins. His mattress rested directly on the floor. You always say that. Because it is. Ethan, you've been taking care of everyone since you were 17. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not proving anything. Then what are you doing? He reached into his wallet and handed her their mother's note. Mia read it in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. She wrote this to you? Yes. She would not want you killing yourself. I'm not. He took the note back carefully. She told me not to surrender. I'm trying to listen. His first opportunity came during a Friday night disaster. Bellamy's had booked a private dinner for a pharmaceutical company. 80 guests were scheduled to arrive at 7. At 6:15, the sous chef cut his hand badly enough to need stitches. At 6:30, the main oven stopped heating. At 6:40, a delivery arrived with the wrong order of vegetables. The kitchen manager, Leonard Pike, began shouting at everyone. Leonard was a tall, nervous man who believed authority worked best when used loudly. He blamed the cooks, the suppliers, the servers, and eventually the dishwasher. Why are we out of clean roasting pans? He demanded. Because the cooks are using all of them, Ethan answered. Then wash faster. There are 6 in the oven. I don't need an explanation. You asked me a question. The kitchen went silent. Leonard stepped closer. Do you want to keep this job? Yes. Then stop thinking and wash dishes. Ethan lowered his head, but he kept watching. The menu for the private dinner included roasted beef, potatoes, asparagus, mushroom sauce, and individual chocolate cakes. The broken oven made the original plan impossible. The chefs argued over which items could be prepared on the stovetop. Ethan looked at the schedule taped beside the walk-in refrigerator. He looked at the equipment being used. Then he looked at the smaller oven in the pastry station. It worked, but it could not hold enough food, unless the timing changed. Ethan walked over to Victor. You can cook the beef in 3 smaller batches. Victor stared at him. Go back to the sink. The pastry oven holds 4 trays. If you lower the portion size before roasting, each batch takes less time. Start the first now. Hold it at low temperature in the warming cabinet. Cook the potatoes on the griddle. Use the asparagus for the second service. Victor's expression hardened. You think because you read books you're a chef now? No. Then shut up. Samuel was standing near the office door. He heard everything. He walked to Leonard and quietly repeated Ethan's plan. Leonard looked toward the dishwasher station. Did he tell you that? Samuel ignored the question. Will it work? Victor reluctantly examined the setup. It might. It will, Ethan said. Leonard pointed at him. You stay at the sink. The plan worked. The first plates left the kitchen 6 minutes late. The guests never knew there had been a problem. At the end of the night, Leonard accepted praise from the restaurant's owner for reorganizing the service under pressure. Victor said nothing. Samuel waited until everyone left. Does that bother you? He asked Ethan. What? That he took credit. Ethan continued wiping the preparation table. A little. Only a little. I still know I was right. Samuel nodded. That answer will protect you, but do not let it make you passive. Knowing your value is not the same as making sure other people know it. 3 months later, Leonard fired Ethan. The reason listed on the termination form was insubordination. The real reason was a spreadsheet. Ethan had been assigned to count dry goods during a slow afternoon. While entering the numbers, he noticed that Bellamy's was ordering far more imported olive oil than the kitchen seemed to use. He reviewed old inventory sheets. The difference had existed for nearly a year. At first, he assumed the restaurant was wasting it. Then he noticed that the invoices were approved by Leonard. Ethan brought the numbers to Samuel. Samuel examined them and asked him not to discuss the issue with anyone else. 2 days later, Leonard called Ethan into the office. The spreadsheet was on the desk. You went through documents you had no permission to examine. I was assigned to count inventory. You were assigned to count boxes, not investigate management. The numbers don't match. That is not your concern. It costs the restaurant almost $18,000 a year. Leonard leaned back. You have a dangerous habit, Ethan. What habit? You forget what you are. Ethan said nothing. Leonard pushed a termination paper across the desk. You're a dishwasher. You were hired because we needed hands in hot water. Not opinions, not questions. Hands. Ethan looked at the paper. Did you steal the oil? Leonard's face changed. Only slightly. But Ethan saw it. Get out. Samuel protested the firing. Leonard claimed Ethan had accessed confidential records, challenged management, and created tension among staff. The owner, Richard Bellamy, was out of the country. Leonard had authority to terminate hourly employees. Ethan left through the delivery door carrying his books in a cardboard wine box. It was raining. He stood beside the dumpsters while water soaked through his shirt and tried to understand what had happened. For 2 years, he had worked every shift he was given. He had cleaned things no one else wanted to touch. He had stayed late, arrived early, learned every system he could, and helped save one of the restaurant's largest events. And he had still been dismissed in less than 5 minutes. Not because he was wrong, because he had seen too much. He walked home in the rain. His room felt smaller than usual. The unpaid electric bill sat on the desk. His tuition payment was due in 11 days. He had just enough money for rent or school, but not both. For the first time since reading his mother's note, Ethan allowed himself to believe that the people laughing at him might have been right. Maybe studying after work was not ambition. Maybe it was pretending. Maybe the distance between a dishwasher and an owner was not crossed with effort. Maybe it was crossed by family money, connections, and luck. Things Ethan did not have. He sat on the floor until midnight. Then someone knocked. It was Samuel. He stood in the hallway holding 2 paper bags. I brought food. I'm not hungry. That was not a question. Samuel entered without waiting for permission and placed the bags on Ethan's improvised desk. Inside were roasted chicken, bread, vegetables, and 2 containers of soup. Bellamy's food? Ethan asked. No, mine. Samuel looked around the room. This is worse than I imagined. Thank you. Samuel sat on the only chair. Ethan remained on the mattress. You were right about the inventory, Samuel said. Leonard has been ordering through a supplier owned by his brother-in-law. The invoices are inflated. Some deliveries never arrive. Does Mr. Bellamy know? He will. Will I get my job back? Probably. Ethan looked at him. Probably. Richard Bellamy dislikes theft, but he also dislikes embarrassment. You exposed a manager he trusted. Men like Richard are not always grateful to the person who proves they made a mistake. Ethan leaned against the wall. So what am I supposed to do? Samuel studied him. You have spent 2 years learning how wealthy people run restaurants. Yes. Now you need to learn how poor people start them. 3 weeks later, Ethan began washing dishes at a 24-hour diner called Rosie's. It paid less than Bellamy's. The kitchen was smaller, the equipment older, and the customers more demanding. But the owner, Rosa Martinez, was different. Rosa had opened the diner 21 years earlier with $6,000, a rented stove, and recipes from her mother. She worked behind the counter every morning. She knew which customers had lost jobs, which ones were celebrating birthdays, and which elderly men ordered coffee because they were lonely. Samuel introduced Ethan and told Rosa only one thing. He learns. Rosa looked at Ethan. Does he work? He works. Then he can learn here. At Rosie's, Ethan did not remain a dishwasher. Within 4 months, Rosa trained him on the grill, then the register, then ordering, then payroll. She showed him supplier contracts and tax bills. She explained which menu items looked profitable but were not. She taught him that customers forgave slow service more easily than cold food, and that employees forgave hard work more easily than disrespect. Most importantly, she showed him the difference between running a restaurant and building one. A restaurant can make money because the owner is here every day, she said. But then the owner does not own a business. The business owns the owner. How do you change that? You create systems another person can follow. Why haven't you? Rosa gave him a hard look. Because knowing the right thing does not mean you have the courage to do it. Ethan began creating procedures for Rosie's. He wrote checklists for opening and closing. He reorganized inventory. He compared vendors. He adjusted portion sizes on 3 dishes that were losing money. He created a weekly schedule based on actual customer traffic instead of habit. Within 6 months, food waste fell by 23%. Labor costs declined without anyone losing a job. Monthly profit increased enough for Rosa to replace the broken freezer and give raises to 2 employees. She offered Ethan an assistant manager position. His salary was still modest, but it was the first time in his life that a job title reflected what he could do. He called Mia. "You sound different," she said. "How?" "Like you're standing up." Ethan smiled. "I think I am." He completed community college the following spring. At graduation, Mia sat beside Samuel and Rosa in the front row. Ethan carried his mother's note inside his jacket. After the ceremony, Samuel handed him a small box. Inside was an old silver watch. "It belonged to my wife," Samuel said. "She gave it to me when we opened our restaurant." "I can't take this." "You can. This should stay with you." Samuel closed Ethan's hand around the box. "I kept it because I thought it represented what we built. It took me years to understand it represented the courage to begin." Ethan looked at the watch. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because you're going to need courage more than I do." The idea for Ethan's first restaurant came from the meals his mother used to cook. He did not want crystal chandeliers or menus without prices. He wanted food that working families could afford. He wanted roasted chicken, beans, vegetables, fresh bread, and slow-cooked meat served quickly in a clean, welcoming space. Not fast food, real food served fast. He called the concept Cole's Table. Samuel helped him build a business plan. Rosa helped develop the menu. Mia tested every recipe and rejected anything that tasted like a business decision. Ethan spent 8 months searching for financing. He approached 9 banks. The first banker barely read the plan. "You have no assets." "I have $10,000 saved." "That is not enough." "I have 6 years of restaurant experience." "You were a dishwasher for part of that." "I manage a profitable diner now." "You don't own it." The second bank rejected him because his credit history was too short. The third wanted collateral. The fourth said the neighborhood he selected was too risky. The fifth said healthy, affordable food was a confused market position. The sixth banker advised him to franchise an established sandwich shop instead. The seventh meeting lasted 12 minutes. The eighth banker told him he had an impressive story but an unproven model. At the ninth bank, Ethan sat across from a woman named Claire Donnelly. She was the vice president of small business lending. She read every page, then she closed the plan. "The numbers are conservative," she said. "I prefer conservative numbers." "Your rent estimate is low." "I negotiated a 2-year introductory rate." "Your labor costs?" "Based on actual scheduling data from Rosie's." "Food cost?" 29%. "That is ambitious." "The menu shares ingredients. Chicken is used in 4 dishes, beans in 3. Vegetables rotate based on supplier prices. We'll have limited waste." Claire studied him. "And what happens when you are not there?" Ethan smiled. He had been waiting years for someone to ask that question. He placed a second binder on her desk. "Operating procedures, opening, closing, training, inventory, food safety, customer complaints, cash controls, and manager responsibilities." She opened it. "You wrote all this?" "Yes." "Before receiving financing?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I'm not opening one restaurant." Claire looked up. "How many are you opening?" "The first one." "That is not what I asked." Ethan held her gaze. "As many as the system can support." Claire did not approve the full loan, but she approved enough. Samuel invested $20,000 from his savings. Rosa invested $15,000 and became a minority partner. Ethan used every dollar he had. Mia, despite his objections, contributed $3,000 she had saved from hospital shifts. The total was still barely enough. They rented a former laundromat in a neighborhood Bellamy's guests rarely visited. The floor was cracked, the ceiling leaked, the electrical system needed replacement. For 3 months, Ethan worked during the day at Rosie's and renovated Cole's table at night. He learned to install drywall from online videos. He bought used tables from a hotel liquidation sale. He painted the walls himself. Samuel handled permits and budgets. Rosa negotiated with suppliers. Mia assembled furniture after 12-hour nursing shifts. They opened on a Tuesday because Ethan could not afford the staff required for a weekend launch. The first customer arrived at 11:40. She was an elderly woman who ordered soup and bread. The second was a construction worker. The third was a mother with 2 children. By 2 in the afternoon, they had served 31 people. By closing time, 48. Revenue for the day was $712. Ethan counted the money twice. He knew it was not enough. But he also knew 48 people had chosen to walk through the door. That meant something. The first month was difficult. The second was worse. A local newspaper reviewed Cole's table and described it as earnest but inconsistent. One cook quit during dinner service. The refrigerator failed on a Friday night, destroying nearly $2,000 in food. A customer posted a photograph of an undercooked chicken portion online. Although Ethan refunded the meal and apologized publicly, sales dropped for 8 days. At the end of the third month, Cole's table had lost $27,000. Ethan stopped paying himself. He slept in the restaurant office 3 nights a week. He sold his car and used the money for payroll. Mia found out when she saw him walking home in heavy rain. "You sold the car?" "I didn't need it." "You sleep at the restaurant?" "Sometimes." "You told me this was temporary 10 years ago." "It still is." She stared at him. "What happens when there is nothing left to sell?" Ethan did not answer. The following morning, Samuel arrived with the financial statements. "You cannot continue like this," he said. "I know." "You have 6 weeks." "I know." "What are you going to change?" Ethan looked around the empty dining room. For months, he had focused on cost. He had reduced waste, negotiated prices, cut his own salary, and scheduled every shift carefully. But he had misunderstood the problem. The restaurant was not failing because expenses were too high. It was failing because too few people had a reason to choose it. Bellamy's sold status. Rosie's sold familiarity. Cole's table sold affordable food. Affordable was useful. It was not memorable. Ethan returned to the original menu. He removed half the dishes. He centered everything around one promise: a complete family-style meal made from real ingredients served quickly at a fair price. He introduced the table, a large platter of roasted chicken, vegetables, beans, bread, and 2 sauces designed to feed 4 people. The price was lower than 4 individual meals. The presentation was dramatic. The smell reached tables before the food did. Families began photographing it, then sharing it. A local teacher posted that Cole's table was the first place in years where she could take her 3 children, feed everyone well, and still afford the bill. The post spread across the neighborhood. The next Saturday, the restaurant ran out of chicken by 7. The week after that, Ethan ordered twice as much. They sold out again. Revenue increased 38% in 1 month. By the 6th month, Cole's table reached break-even. By the end of the first year, it had produced a modest profit. Ethan paid Mia back first, then he bought a used car. Then he gave raises to the original staff members who had stayed through the worst months. He did not open a second location immediately. People urged him to. A local investor offered money. A shopping center offered discounted rent. Ethan refused. He spent another year strengthening the systems. He promoted a cashier named Lila Grant to shift manager and trained her to run every part of the restaurant. He created an employee education program that paid for food safety certificates and management courses. He added profit sharing for senior staff. When Samuel asked why he was giving away money before expanding, Ethan answered without hesitation: Because people protect what they help build. The second Cole's Table opened 3 years after the first. It became profitable in 7 months. The third opened 14 months later. The fourth opened the following year. Each restaurant looked similar but not identical. Each served the same core menu. Each manager completed a 12-week training program. Ethan visited every location, but he no longer needed to be present for them to function. He had built what Rosa had warned him most owners never achieved, a business that did not depend on the owner's constant rescue. 5 years after opening the first location, Cole's Table had 8 restaurants and more than 300 employees. Ethan was invited to speak at a hospitality conference. He stood backstage in a tailored navy suit and looked down at Samuel's silver watch on his wrist. A young event assistant approached him. "Mr. Cole, they're ready for you." For a moment, the name sounded unfamiliar. Mr. Cole. Years earlier, people had called him Dishwasher, Professor, Broke Boy, Dreamer. Now, hundreds of restaurant owners were waiting to hear how he had built one of the fastest-growing regional dining companies in the state. He walked onto the stage. The first question came from a man in the front row. "What was the greatest advantage you had when you started?" Ethan thought about the banks that rejected him, the car he sold, the nights on the office floor, the cooks who mocked him for studying. "I knew what it felt like to be invisible," he said, "so I built a company that pays attention." The answer appeared in an industry magazine the following month. Richard Bellamy read it in his office. Bellamy's Steakhouse was no longer the restaurant it had once been. The original location remained profitable, but the company had expanded too quickly. Richard had opened restaurants in expensive neighborhoods without strong local management. Food quality became inconsistent. Employee turnover increased. 2 locations closed. Debt grew. The brand still looked successful from the outside, but its structure was weakening. Leonard Pike had been fired years earlier after the supplier fraud was confirmed. Richard had offered Ethan his dishwasher job back with 2 weeks of missed wages. Ethan had declined. Richard never forgot him. At first, he remembered Ethan as the employee who had embarrassed management, then as the former dishwasher who opened a small restaurant in an undesirable neighborhood, then as the owner of 3 restaurants, then 6, then 8. By the time Cole's Table opened its 12th location, Richard stopped describing Ethan as lucky. He began studying him. Bellamy's problems became public during Ethan's 9th year in business. A lender filed a claim after the company violated a debt agreement. Suppliers shortened payment terms. Employees began leaving. Industry publications reported that Bellamy Hospitality Group was considering strategic alternatives, which was a polite way of saying the company was running out of options. Ethan saw the news but did not react. He had no desire for revenge. Bellamy's had been the place where he learned, suffered, and began. It belonged to another life. Then Claire Donnelly called. She was no longer a bank vice president. She now led commercial lending for a regional investment firm. "Would you consider an acquisition?" she asked. "Of what?" "Bellamy Hospitality." Ethan was silent. "The entire company?" "The remaining 6 restaurants, brand rights, properties, and debt." "Why would I want it?" "Because 3 of the locations are excellent. The brand still has value. The company is poorly managed, not worthless." "And the other 3? "1 should be sold. 2 could be converted." Ethan looked through the window of his office. Below him, employees were preparing for lunch service at the 15th Cole's Table location. "How much?" Claire told him. The number was large enough to frighten him, not because he could not afford it, because he could. 10 years earlier, Ethan had stood in Bellamy's kitchen and counted minutes until the shift ended. Now someone was asking whether he wanted to buy the company. He spent 6 weeks reviewing the acquisition. Samuel, now 73, examined the financial documents with him. Rosa challenged every optimistic assumption. Mia, who had become a hospital administrator, asked the simplest question. "Do you want Bellamy's because it is a good investment or because they hurt you?" Ethan leaned back. "That's what I'm trying to understand. What will happen if you don't buy it?" "Someone else will, or it will collapse." And if you do, I can keep the strongest locations, protect the employees, convert the others. That is the business answer. Yes. What is the personal answer? Ethan looked down at Samuel's watch. The personal answer is that part of me still sees the back door. Mia nodded. Then do not buy it to prove you can walk through the front. He remembered those words during the final negotiations. Richard Bellamy attended the meeting in person. He was older than Ethan remembered. His hair had thinned, and the confidence that once filled every room now seemed carefully maintained. They sat across from each other at a long conference table. Lawyers and financial advisors surrounded them. Richard looked at Ethan for several seconds. You worked for me. I did. In the kitchen. Yes. You were the one who found the inventory issue. I was. Richard lowered his eyes. I handled that badly. Ethan did not respond. I should have met with you personally, Richard continued. I should have listened before allowing Leonard to terminate you. Yes. The direct answer seemed to surprise him. Richard folded his hands. Do you hate this company? No. Then why do you want it? I don't want all of it. Richard's expression tightened. Ethan opened the acquisition plan. 3 locations remain profitable. 1 property should be sold. 2 restaurants will be converted into Cole's Table locations. The Bellamy's brand will continue, but smaller, stronger. You're dismantling what I built. I'm removing what it cannot carry. Richard looked toward his attorneys. You sound very certain. I studied the numbers. You always did like studying. The comment was quiet. For a second, Ethan was back at the stainless steel table after midnight with water still soaking his sleeves and line cooks laughing as they walked past. Richard turned the purchase agreement toward himself. My father opened the first Bellamy's, he said. I spent 35 years expanding it. I know. And now I'm selling it to a former dishwasher. Ethan held his gaze. You're selling it to the person who understands what happens in every room of a restaurant. Richard signed. The acquisition closed on a Monday morning. Ethan did not celebrate with champagne. He went to the original Bellamy's location at 5 in the afternoon. The brass entrance had been polished. The chandeliers still glowed above the white tablecloths. A hostess greeted him immediately. Good evening, Mr. Cole. He entered through the front door. Then he continued walking past the dining room, through the swinging kitchen doors, and down the narrow hallway toward the dish station. The industrial sink had been replaced, but the preparation table was the same. A young dishwasher stood there scrubbing pans. He could not have been older than 20. A textbook was hidden beneath the lower shelf, protected inside a plastic bag. Ethan noticed it. What are you studying? The young man looked nervous. Computer programming. After your shift? Yes, sir. Does your manager know? The dishwasher glanced toward the kitchen. I don't think he cares. Ethan pulled out a chair beside the old preparation table. What's your name? Caleb. Caleb, after you finish tonight, ask the manager to show you the employee education program. The what? We pay part of the tuition for employees taking approved courses. Caleb stared at him. Even dishwashers? Ethan looked at the wet floor, the stacks of plates, the steam rising beneath the fluorescent lights, especially dishwashers. That evening, Ethan gathered the staff before dinner service. Some employees knew his story. Others knew only that Cole Hospitality had purchased the company. They expected closures, layoffs, and changes. Ethan stood in the center of the kitchen. No one loses a job today, he said. Some systems will change, some menus will change, expectations will rise, but anyone willing to learn and work will have a place here. A server raised her hand. What happens to the Bellamy's name? It stays. Why? Ethan looked around the kitchen where he had once been told to stop thinking. Because a business should not be destroyed just because someone managed it badly. It should be rebuilt. Over the following year, Ethan did exactly that. He closed the weakest location and offered transfers to every employee. He converted 2 restaurants into Cole's table locations. He reduced Bellamy's menu, replaced unreliable suppliers, and created a manager training system. He changed scheduling practices that had exhausted employees. He introduced scholarships for workers pursuing education. He required senior executives to spend 2 full shifts each year working in kitchens, dining rooms, and dish stations. When one executive complained that washing dishes was not an efficient use of leadership time, Ethan answered calmly, "If you don't understand the hardest job in your building, you do not understand your building." 10 years after the night Leonard fired him, Ethan stood outside the original Bellamy's before sunrise. The street was quiet. The sky carried the gray-orange color that appeared for only a few minutes before morning settled into place. A new plaque had been installed beside the entrance. Bellamy's Steakhouse. A Cole Hospitality Company. Ethan touched the silver watch on his wrist. Samuel stood beside him, leaning slightly on a cane. Rosa had brought coffee. Mia held an old photograph of their mother. "You did it," Mia said. Ethan looked at the building. "No," she frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned toward her. "I thought buying this place would feel like the end." "And it doesn't?" "No." "What does it feel like?" Ethan looked through the front windows. Employees were arriving. A cook unlocked the side entrance. A delivery truck stopped at the curb. Inside, lights came on one by one. "It feels like responsibility," Samuel smiled. "That is the correct answer." Ethan took his mother's note from his wallet. The paper was worn, yellowed, and nearly transparent along the folds. "Do not confuse responsibility with surrender. Help your sister, but do not bury your own life. You were meant to build something." For years, Ethan had believed building something meant escaping poverty. Then he believed it meant owning a restaurant, then a company, then the chain that once employed him. But standing outside Bellamy's that morning, he understood what his mother had meant. Wealth was not the building. It was not the number in a bank account. It was the ability to create choices where none had existed before. A choice for Mia to study instead of leaving school. A choice for Rosa to retire without selling her diner to strangers. A choice for hundreds of employees to learn, advance, and support their families. A choice for Caleb and every worker like him to be seen as more than the position printed beside their name. Ethan folded the note and returned it to his wallet. The restaurant doors opened. He did not walk toward the private office. He entered the kitchen. The morning dishwasher had not arrived yet, and breakfast preparation had left several pans stacked beside the sink. Ethan removed his jacket. He rolled up his sleeves. Rosa laughed. "You own 23 restaurants." "24 now," Mia corrected. Samuel looked at the pans. "You have people for that." Ethan turned on the water. Steam rose from the sink. "I know." He picked up the first pan. "But I remember when no one thought the person standing here could become anything else." Outside, the city was waking. Inside, the restaurant prepared for another day. And Ethan Cole, the man they had mocked for reading business books after washing their plates, stood in the kitchen of the company he now owned and began the morning exactly where his journey had started, with his hands in the water. But this time, his name was on the building,